right, so this here is our final card, and all it is this silver foil tape on top of cardstock, and then we ran it through the cardstock. Ran it through the Big Shot machine with a 3D embossing folder. Now, for this, I am using, this is, I think, industrial tape. I've gotten it at, I guess for ducting in houses and stuff like that. You can buy foil tape sheets so that you could do an entire piece of cardstock with a whole sheet without having seams. Because if you look super closely, you can see a seam in here. But by the time we're done this technique, you're not actually going to see that. So for trying out a technique, it's kind of nice when you can get some inexpensive supplies to try it out. So what I'm going to do here, and I realize that I got the wrong color here. This is actually supposed to be this one here that I have on my background. So all I'm doing is rubbing the Inka Golds on the metallic foil. And you can see that some of the colors show up very, very well. Some of them are a little bit more subtle, but it just all adds to the look of it. It goes on super easy because that foil is non-porous. It just comes right off your fingers. And then let's use a little bit of the brown here. I've got some turquoise on my finger, so let's use a different one here. But just so you know, you don't have to use just cardstock. You can absolutely use some other surfaces as well. I've done, I mean, one of the last cards we did some brads, but I've also done some on some metal charms on cards as well. And it works really, really well on that. And after it's dried, it's really hard to scratch it off. I've tried. So I'm going to put my lid on there. Clean my fingers a bit. I'm going to let that dry for a few seconds, and then we're going to highlight some of the embossing with some StazOn ink, which is a permanent ink. I just realized I have the wrong ink pad sitting out there, so I want to make sure that I'm doing it with the right ink pad. All right, so now we're going to do our die cut. Now, I'm doing this stenciling with a die. You could easily do this with a plastic stencil if you wanted to do a stenciled background using the Inka Gold. So this particular die only cuts the outside of the image. There's a lot of detail in there that it doesn't actually cut out. And the reason for this is so that you can stencil if you want. Now you do need to press a little bit harder with this just to get down into that image, just because there's a little bit of dimension to dies. You could also do this with ink pads and whatnot, and like blending brushes and stuff like that. So I'm not saying this is the only way to get to stencil your dies, but it's just a different way to use some of the Inka Gold with your die cuts or with stencils. So I'm going to take this off right now. Any of that Inka Gold that's on that die there can easily be washed right off. I'm going to set that aside, and now we'll do the StazOn. So all I'm doing for the StazOn is just lightly running my pad down that foil. And I'm trying to do it all directions. And what that does is it just highlights some of that raised surface, and it also ties in the black that I have going on with that butterfly and with that sentiment. So typically I would wait for this to dry. It only takes, I want to say like 30 seconds. It's a non-porous surface, and StazOn is great for non-porous surfaces. So we are going to put our image or our embossed piece down, and that StazOn is not dry yet. So this is going to need to be weighed down to stick. And then once it's done, all I'm doing is gluing that butterfly on there and then popping up my sentiment with some pop dots. So I'll do that once it is completely dried, and I'll see you back in a few minutes. All right, so our base piece is glued onto our card base. And now I'm going to glue the butterfly on. And that is going to take a few minutes for that to dry because we are trying to glue it onto a non-porous surface. So I am going to let that sit there to dry. I'm not going to lift it up. But there we go. Inka Gold onto silver foil, and then also stenciling with a die cut.